Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 5th, 2016. Happy Monday, happy December to you. Of course, December came around at the end of last week. But because this is the beginning of the week, we treat this as the official beginning of December for no particular purposes. But hey, why not join us on a free-ranging exploration of what the hell to do with 2 hours today? There's plenty to cover, of course. Where to start is the question. Big exciting news over the weekend, of course, for all the activists out at Standing Rock. The pipeline protest, the Dakota Access Pipeline protest, with a big success, which I think everybody there recognizes has tremendous potential to be temporary and nothing more. I don't think that they are fooled for a minute into giving up the fight, even before President Trump gets installed. But congratulations to them for their perseverance. This, not my beat, and I feel inadequate to the task of congratulating them properly. Certainly, plotting the route forward is not up to me, and actually, even if I had been following this beat for forever, it really wouldn't be up to me either. Got to follow the lead of the people on the ground there and the people who have personal skin in the game. But we'll follow along. Nonetheless, we actually do want to set important upfront on the show time aside to say congrats to you. Long fight ahead, perhaps. We wish you the best and enjoy that success. Hope that it inspires many more like it. It really did strike me over the weekend, as it struck me for a long time. I haven't been vocal on the issue because it's, like I said, I just chose to say I'm on that bandwagon. The people who are there, that strikes me as right, and I was perfectly willing to go along with it, and that's basically it. I mean, it just was really out of my depth to discuss that issue, like so many other issues. But very few of the rest of those issues actually prevent me from doing it. That one I was just, I really felt like I didn't have my legs under me for that issue, other than to say they sound like they got it together right. I made observations along the way, of course, like how come Hobby Lobby protections don't seem to have any sway with Native American religion? And of course the answer is duh, because not one of us and not Christian, and that's basically it. So congratulations to them for getting the win with the Army Corps of Engineers. I guess that's the very technical way of describing it is, I guess the Army Corps of Engineers had the opportunity to approve or deny some easements and some permits for the construction across Native American lands, and have decided to deny those permits, perhaps at the direction of the president, perhaps at their own direction. I don't really know how that works. But I was excited to see it, and one of the other observations, over the weekend and toward the end of this thing was I kept hearing, because you've been listening to the show, you've been hearing all kinds of punditry on the necessity of paying closer and more sympathetic and real attention to the issues facing rural folks, and that rural America was demanding its time in the, its moment in the sun for its problems that they've been ignored for so long. And there was an awful lot of validity to that, although we had some differences about the way it was presented and what it actually meant. The pushback, of course, was from the progressive side that you could not and should not ever take rural to mean white and white only. There are a lot of people that are, of course, whose problems have been ignored, and not all of whom are rural by any stretch of the imagination. But even if for the sake of argument you wanted to limit it to rural issues, what would make anybody think that rural people are white and white only? There are plenty of other than white rural people. And guess what? If one of the largest groups of such people is not Native Americans, well, guess what it isn't? Don't bother guessing what if it is not, because it is. And it seemed to me like this was a terrific issue to meld the two important points here, that rural issues were important and deserved close attention, and that we should not do that at the cost of ignoring or paying any less attention to the issues faced by communities that happen not to be white and to be people of color instead. And this was a great opportunity to, I thought, to ground the Democratic Party, if that can be said to have happened. I mean, it hasn't yet, but it's a step in the right direction. It would be a great place from which to say Democrats do stand for paying attention to the plight of people in trouble, whether they be white or otherwise, rural or otherwise. This was a good place to stand up and say, look, here's a rural issue that doesn't require us to pander to a white working class audience, and makes a lot of sense. And plus, makes good environmental sense and pretty decent governing and business sense too. I mean, one of the real issues, I think, for a lot of progressives in this pipeline issue, and here I'm just guessing, but it seems like this is what I was hearing, was that, and I'm finding this to be the case more generally, not just in this context, but that this is perhaps the first time I've seen demonstrated more clearly, I guess, the separation between people who say, who specifically go out of their way to describe themselves as being progressive rather than liberal. And they may be overstating the case. I'm sure they don't think so, but it was a good point nonetheless for them to say, well, liberal has kind of morphed into something slightly different. I mean, we may wish for classical liberalism to reassert itself, and that wouldn't be a bad thing. But I guess it's sort of morphed into, well, this is one of those vague terms I don't like to use very much because I don't really know exactly what the hell they mean by neoliberal. But it does make me think more of DLC / third way leadership type. In other words, how shall we say it? The impetus to portray oneself as a Democrat that is still nonetheless pro-business, or at least open to the ideas that there might be something of value to be gained from business, and that was in fashion for a while, a long time, late 80s into the 90s and into the 2000s, and still there, and still a prevalent part. A large part, maybe even the better part, of the Congressional Democratic Caucus, who still feel like they need to prove their credentials as legitimate politicians by countering the old Republican attack that Democrats were somehow anti-business. And these are some of the ways that they did it by saying, well, there are certain business projects that we can back and some places where we'll sacrifice environmental principle to economic interests. And this was a place where a liberal Democratic administration was allowing that to go forward. I'm glad that that was reconsidered. I think that's a place where Democrats can become recentered, and it's a good time to do it too, because there's no serious indication that the old guard Republicans who are laissez-faire, hands-off pro-business still exist and or hold the reins in the Republican Party, and we ought to exploit that opportunity to free ourselves up to occupy more traditional and more comfortable economic grounds. So that was more than I planned to say about the Dakota Access Pipeline thing, but I think I stayed off of the pipeline itself and safely on speculation about the future of the Democratic Party, which I think anybody is pretty much qualified to discuss. As a matter of fact, to prove that, Greg Dworkin is here.
Which I didn't want to interrupt because it was a very interesting talk you were doing there.
I was having some fun here. By the way, I think that Trump may be starting psychological warfare operations against me as a payback for my suggestion that NBC, it's payback for my suggesting that NBC go to a 24/7 SNL format to keep him paralyzed with hate tweets. I think he is hacking my son's AP World History teacher's homework site and assigning too much work and causing my son to forget about it until 8 or 9 p.m. on Sunday. And so I end up staying up until 2:30 teaching the history of the world. So I'm a little out of it. But we got a statement on the future of the Democratic Party out of it.
Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Okay.
I have to add, just before I forget, that our friends at Hopping Mad have a nice interview with Anita Lind about the whole pipeline thing.
See, now, there we go. Now, we have access to people who are qualified to discuss this. I just don't wake up early and do it. But that's the role of that's where Hopping Mad folks come in. They love doing the interviews with the folks who know the topic. I like to just say, I don't know what I'm going to do, and then say things. And then, of course, there's the after show, which is, P.S. other things happened.
Yeah, it's a different format,
Yeah.
So let me go over a couple of pieces. One of the other people that would be a great person to talk about the pipeline thing would be Tim Lang, Meteor Blades.
Yes.
Now, by the way, he used to do the Monday Pundit Roundup, and I did Thursday, but we switched. And so I did today, and I came across a couple of pieces that I thought were right in the same ballpark as what you were talking about in terms of the rural, urban, or not ignoring sort of things. So, pardon me. Some are kind of interesting,
all right,
in their own right for different reasons. For example, let's look at jobs.
All right, which one?
I mean, actual jobs. Well, first, let's look at the job of an economist.
All right.
This is a fascinating piece at so many levels from Noah Smith, otherwise known as No Opinion, which is a really great handle. A job is more than a paycheck.
True.
From Bloomberg.
You have to wake up.
Listen to how he starts out. In the aftermath of the 2016 presidential election, I'm starting to rethink one of my basic beliefs about the economy. For a long time, remember, he is a Bloomberg View columnist, assistant professor of finance, or was an assistant professor of finance at Stony Brook University, and he blogs at No Opinion. I believe that what mattered most for economic well-being was money. Median income, consumption, wages, all the things I cared about most were measured in dollars as an economist. Because of this attitude, I supported lots of policies aimed at boosting the amount of money in the average person's pocket. I've called for Japan to liberalize its markets, for the U.S. to encourage workers to move to places with better opportunities, and I've often assumed that $1 of government redistribution is just as good as $1 of wages, but I'm starting to think I was wrong. Maybe not completely wrong, but I did ignore a big, important source of economic well-being, jobs.
Yes.
Basically, there's a big difference between having a job and getting paid for it and then just getting paid.
True.
In most of economic theory, he says, a job isn't treated as something inherently valuable, just a conduit through which money flows. But most people probably care not just about the amount of money they get, but how they get it. If they see themselves having earned their daily bread, they feel better about themselves than if they got a handout. A job also probably has an important symbolic value. It sends a message that society cares about you and has a place for you. I say probably, because this isn't just something economists think about much. So it doesn't appear in the research literature much. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, doctors have to do a series of apprenticeships, you might call them.
Okay.
Rotations in various and sundry places before you even, in some cases, you have to do that before you even get to medical school. It won't take you unless you spend some time in the hospital so you can prove you have some idea of what you're getting into. What if economists actually had to do blue-collar jobs for a year or two before they went to economy school?
Not like Undercover Boss, but real work?
Oh, real work,
Okay.
Go work at McDonald's, Go work at a factory job, maybe a night shift. Go do those things. And talk to people, and then maybe have a better idea of the effect of some of the things that you're talking about in terms of how it works.
Well, we'd have a lot less economists. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But okay, that's an interesting thought.
Mike Gonzalez has a companion piece, Learning from Trump in Retrospect. And he says, there was a time I assumed if the Democrats moved left, they could win over the working class, even those who don't usually vote. Now spending time thinking about agendas and messaging, I realize this move is far more complicated than getting past neoliberalism. The term has a function, but I hate the term because it's too broadly painted to be used at this thing that I don't agree with.
I don't understand it.
Yeah. With Trump at the helm of the conservative movement for the foreseeable future, it'll be even harder. Watching Trump with fresh eyes shows we need to think clearer about how our policy forces people to concede to changing social norms, how to convey the rich is the problem, how to have clear messaging, how to deal with trade, how to deal with wages and power.
Aww.
I don't have the answers, not here and now, but getting the questions right is the first step. And step one, get back, way back, to work. Trump talked about jobs all the time. This gets lost in the coverage, which focused on the inflammatory scandals. Watch, and he gives an example. Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016.
Yes.
This was in Michigan. When I win on November 8th, I'm going to bring back your jobs. The long nightmare of jobs leaving Michigan will be coming to an end. We'll make Michigan the economic envy of the world. The political class in Washington has betrayed you. They've uprooted your jobs. That's jobs three times. And your communities and shipped your wealth all over the world. They put new skyscrapers up in Beijing while your factories in Michigan crumbled. I will end the theft of American prosperity. I will fight for every last Michigan job. So in that short statement, jobs 4 times. First and most consistent thing he discusses. It's implied. It's a specific kind of job, a white male breadwinning manufacturing job. He doesn't discuss economy, how it could work for all. He doesn't talk about inequality. He doesn't talk about automation. He doesn't talk about service work. He makes it clear you'll have a high-paying manufacturing job when he is president.
Well, he makes it clear that he says that.
Right. But we're talking about the appeal, not necessarily whether he can actually do it.
Right.
And in fact, of course, the danger there is promising that and then not delivering is going to be a big problem for him. But that's another story for another day. Point is, his appeal was based on jobs and understanding that jobs are important. And this gets back to some of the stuff that we talked about. We talked about the Chris Arnott stuff. We talked about going to places like West Virginia or Lewiston, Maine. And it is a huge problem if you have a situation where not everybody can go back to college at age 50 or wants to or was even suited for it when they were 18. And you have a situation where there may only be one kind of job available in a community like West Virginia. You know, it's got something to do with the mines or it doesn't exist. Or if you're in Hollywood, it may have something to do with the motion picture industry, or what they used to call movies. Mm-hmm. But you may not want to move. And so if you don't move, then you're not going to have a job. The only way to get a job is to move somewhere else. You don't want to move because your whole life is there, your family is there, maybe your church is there. And so it's not easy to just get up and move away. It's a lot easier for the kids to do that. And so then you have a double hurt because you stay and the kids go. And then you never see your kids anymore.
Yes.
And so there's lots of things wrapped up in this that turn out to be true. I guess the difference to me between the Democratic message, which failed, the message failed, but maybe the policy was better, versus Donald Trump's messaging, which clearly succeeded, even though the policy isn't there, is whether or not you're lying about it.
Yeah.
Just
that they can't tell you.
You know, and it's a big deal. And the problem with Democrats is that we really try not to completely flat out lie about things. And
yeah.
It puts us at a disadvantage.
I know.
You tell a story if you can lie.
Yeah, that does help, doesn't it? It frees you up for so much more. I mean, I guess that's true. We certainly could have, and I guess next time, look out for arriving in these places and saying either what's bugging these people or what can I say that they'll think is bugging them if I say it enough times, even if it's not the case. But just say it, and I'll fix it. How? You know, I don't know. Who cares? And don't say I don't know. But you say like he does, we'll do something. I don't know what. And sometimes he did say, I don't know. We'll do something great.
We'll do it great. Yeah, exactly. We'll make America great again.
Yeah.
So anyway, this whole focus,
I can do it.
I think is very appropriate to look at rural areas and what's happened to them, and in terms of how they view people in places like Washington and New York in regard to, do you have rural areas' interests in mind at all? Not best interests in mind, but in mind at all. Used to be that, there was a compromise for that you could pass an agriculture bill.
Yes.
But you'd include food stamps, and you'd do other things that would help everybody. And there was kind of consensus about that, which is broken down. I blame mostly the Republican House, which wants to block everything because otherwise Democrats will get credit. And in the process, don't really do good for anybody because they'd rather have nothing get done. Getting back to that whole idea of, you got to compromise so that there's something for everybody is still a good idea and still a big deal. But this concept here of looking at rural areas, it isn't just trying to recruit white working class voters who want manufacturing jobs at the expense of people of color. It's about recognizing that jobs in and of itself are important and have worth, and it's more important to people and probably a lot more understandable to people in their gut to talk about jobs than it is to talk about some abstract economic this, that, and everything else, numbers on a graph and other things that don't really hit home.
Well, in hindsight, we should have been paying more attention to FarmersOnly.com commercials.
Well, just recognizing the fact of honest days' work, which the Trump family doesn't do, as valuable, I think is worthwhile. And now here's another iteration of this whole: how do you feel about business, and are you business friendly or are you not business friendly, and how does that shape up in the 21st century? So there's another business discussion that's going to come up, only it doesn't feel like it's business, or it should be business, but the problem is it really is. And that is education. Betsy DeVos at the Department of Education and the whole thing about charter schools and where they go.
Yes.
Because that's a new business. Didn't exist before. But charter schools are a way of taking money, because there's only so much that goes in the pot, and the education pot now gets split between public schools and charter schools, or in some cases public schools and private schools. And the thing about Betsy DeVos is she doesn't want standards for charter schools, and she's very much supportive of vouchers. Yeah. And the trouble with vouchers is that if you give a voucher, then even more money is sucked out of the system because you don't know where that goes. Because it may go to a non-public, non-charter school. So the charter school people aren't necessarily real thrilled with Betsy DeVos being over at education. And that's going to be a large fight and a major mess with a lot of upset people. And one of the not talked about all that much, but major department nominees to really watch.
Yeah. You usually don't have a huge fight over the Department of Education.
Along with Jeff Sessions
and that's always a fight.
Yeah.
Attorney General always gets fighting level attention. Education Secretary, not always the case. That's true. That'll be
right. Sometimes you just say bad things about him because you don't like how it turned out.
Yes. Right.
But rarely is it a knockdown, drag out fight about things. I don't know where she stands on creationism. I don't know that she cares. I think she's all about the money.
Maybe. Yeah, that'll be pretty interesting. I guess here we have to ask the economists. Come back from McDonald's and tell us what you think about the behavior of private schools who find out that their current, usually rather exclusive level of tuition, the tuition that they're charging. What's the economic impact of adding more or less universal access to vouchers that help pay some amount of that tuition? Because my understanding is that basically if a school considers itself a kind of an exclusive institution and you just and they charge $25,000 a year, let's say, and you give everybody in the country access to $5,000 a year in vouchers and say, well, you can't afford the exclusive $25,000 a year school, but you can go to a pretty good private school, perhaps as an alternative to your local failing public school, if that's what you like to think about it, for $5,000. But we're making the access to those vouchers universal because fairness and people who spend out of pocket should be able to get some back too. and et cetera, et cetera. And we don't want it to be a welfare program. Everybody gets access. What happens to your $25,000 tuition at the top school? The top school tuition goes to $30,000 because it's no skin off anybody else's nose. They just collect the voucher plus the $25,000 they were asking for before. No economic. They don't just freeze your tuition and say, hey, it's $5,000 off for rich people.
So we've talked about, why I think it's important to subscribe and support journalism, local paper, New York Times, Washington Post.
Send $5,000.
If you have issues with them, because we need the journalists to really talk about some of the issues that the politicians don't want to talk about.
Yes.
And one of the publications that I think has really been doing a great job is The Atlantic. And there's this piece, The Notable Silence of New York's Charter School Leaders, to open up the conversation here. Betsy DeVos is an advocate of education choice. That why haven't many of her colleagues rallied behind her? The short answer is vouchers. She's not, and they're not voucher fans because they don't know where the money's going to be spent after that. But if we have education experts and others who listen to the show who would like to chime in on Twitter or maybe do a segment that David could use on the show,
yes,
that would be wonderful because I think it's going to be a huge and important issue, and I just don't want to get that forgotten about or not cover it because we may not have the actual expertise.
Yes, I would agree. I'll take that.
So moving on from that, other parts about it that we don't want to forget, and it's important to remember in this whole rural, urban, white, working class, everybody else discussion. Here's a piece from Dylan Matthews, and it's all in the Pundit Roundup today, this morning. You can find it there. Okay. Donald Trump has every reason to keep white people thinking about race.
Yes.
You know why? Because it works.
Sure. And they're doing it anyway.
Yeah. But Dylan Matthews goes over a whole bunch of social science experiments, political science, political psychology research, that even very mild messages or cues that touch on race can alter political opinions. I don't know if we covered this on the show before, but I think it's apropos and worth remembering. The landmark book on the subject is Princeton professor Tali Mendelberg's 2001 book, The Race Card, which marshaled a wide array of evidence. Try saying that real time, 3 times fast. Wide array of evidence to show that implicit racial messages are used with shocking regularity by American politics and have real effects, of course. Everybody instantly, as they do, remembers the next paragraph here. Mendelberg looks back to George H.W. Bush's 1988 attacks on Michael Dukakis for furloughing murderer Willie Horton, which weren't explicitly racial, but compellingly argues that tying Dukakis to a black murderer successfully appealed to white voters who already had racially conservative views. I think that's fair to say.
At least.
And that kind of sanitizes what that ad actually was. Mendelberg also runs her own experiment to explore the idea. She conducted a study with a random sample of Michigan voters where she showed fake television news stories about a gubernatorial race. In the stories, the conservative candidate was arguing that welfare recipients were an unfair burden. Some of the fake stories featured B-roll of black welfare recipients, and others featured B-roll of white recipients. B-roll is that stuff that goes on in the background while you're talking. That isn't necessarily an actual interview. It could be from somewhere else some other time.
Yes.
They were otherwise identical.
What have you, yeah.
But the stories with B-roll of black recipients led respondents to express significantly more hostile views toward government programs to assist black people. In fact, the effect on their expressed racial views was stronger than the effect on their expressed opinions on welfare. And then goes on to show some other more subtle things, and then some recent stuff. And you see Berkeley political science Gabriel Lenz's book, Follow the Leader, makes this point in great detail, that if people take their policy views largely from elites, then you have Trump in the White House, and that's a big deal in terms of where this goes. Okay, and more recent work, Brookman and Butler got a number of state legislators to randomly send out letters to constituents. Some explained a policy position of the legislator in detail, some only briefly and with minimal justification, and the others were neutral controls. They also surveyed the constituents receiving the letters before and after, and they found that receiving letters often led constituents to adopt their representative's opinion, even when they had disagreed before, which inverts our normal understanding of politics. This actually makes politicians sound like leaders.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
Who did this? All right. That's interesting. By the way, I was just curious, who paid for the mailings that they make them do this?
I don't know. They could have been legitimate, actual policy things.
Sure. Although,
and they just decided to write them
says,
differently, and therefore they would have been totally legitimate for the taxpayers to do it.
Yeah.
Because they were going to do it anyway.
Okay. I assume that they paid some attention to that, as opposed to, hey, why don't you just do this thing? Because why would the legislators say yes? This is a good opportunity to communicate with constituents. I do this regularly. I will inform you when I'm doing it, and you can study those people. Okay.
Anyway, so he makes the point more broadly. Trump's racial controversies and the justifiably outraged reactions of Democrats and other political opponents are going to keep issues of race salient in a way they weren't under Bush or even Obama, both of which took pains to avoid blow-ups in issues of race. And to his credit, Bush did the same with religion right after 9/11, did his best to show up in mosques and so on and so forth, and tamp that down, which is the exact opposite of what Trump has done. Under Trump, race will stay in the headlines, at the forefront of political debates, on news skyruns, just as it was throughout the 2016 election, and if merely thinking about race pushes white people, even liberal white people, to be more racially resentful, that could have major consequences even outside a rally around the leader effect. The issue being a persistent topic at all could produce a more racially resentful white electorate. Again, that's important to bring up because those of us who keep talking about white working class voters and what it means and trying to analyze it and figure out where they're coming from is not because we want to abandon people of color in favor only of white working class people. It's to be aware of this whole concept that if you're pushing them to be even more racially resentful, it's going to make it much harder for you to win elections, and elections have consequences. And that's not the same thing as triangulating or Sister Souljah or any of the DLC stuff. It's being aware of how things are presented so that you don't make it worse rather than trying to make it better. Okay. And I think that'll be an important, subtle distinction going forward.
Yes.
Well, why do you keep talking about white working class voters? Just to make sure that we don't give Trump more ammunition than he already has.
I guess that's true.
Because I guarantee you he will use it.
He's used it to great effect to this point and continues to hold rallies, I assume, with the aim of continuing to use it. I guess to the extent that we aim to disarm that weapon, it's worth doing.
Right. And so, whereas Jamel Boy's absolutely right when he says he can't overestimate how many people saw Obama as distributing for blacks and immigrants and not for whites, at the same time, the thing to concentrate on maybe isn't that, but what Brett Ahrens does at Market Watch, which is to say, concentrate on how Trump voters themselves are scammed. We talked about that a little bit the other day with the odd reaction of the Trump voter who found out that Steve Mnuchin was going to be at Goldman Sachs. And Brett Ahrens over at Market Watch makes a finer point on it, a subtle point, which perhaps maybe after reading this we'll have to explain to people because it's just too darn subtle, okay? Mm-hmm. Hey, Trumpkins, he says, have you worked it out yet? Is the truth dawning on you, or are you still in the dark? See if you can put it together. Treasury Secretary nominee Steve Mnuchin, Goldman Sachs. Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, Goldman Sachs. Transition Advisor Anthony Scaramucci, Goldman Sachs. Commerce Secretary nominee Wilbur Ross, Rothschild & Company. Possible Budget Director Gary Cohn, Goldman Sachs. Potential Secretary of State Mitt Romney, probably won't be. That was just for his humiliation. Bain Capital. Trump is just getting started. Check out that swamp draining. The whole thing is just draining before our eyes. Take that, Wall Street. Take that, international financial cabal.
Literally. Take that piece, cut it off of the government, and take it.
Right, Trumpkins, you've been scammed. There's a sucker in the game, and it's you.
Oh,
right. That was
pretty
subtle,
right? I don't know if that does anything to tamp down on the white people thing, but okay.
Trumpkins are learning the hard way what happens when you buy an investment scheme from a con artist. I've been writing about scam artists for 20 years. They always promise you the moon, and that is until your check clears. When will these voters get it? Maybe never. Author Maria Konavoka notes in her book The Confidence Game that many victims refuse to admit they've been scammed, no matter what the evidence. Many just keep coming back for more. This is something I'll bet Donald Trump knows full well, and which he's banking on, pun intended, in 2020. Meanwhile, give credit where credit is due. Trump is fattening the bank accounts of the elite, but he may have saved 1,000 jobs at Carrier. Actually, Obama probably does that 10 times over every day, but that's besides the point. If he really did good for for him, and those who oppose Trump should stop being so churlish about it. After all, on President Barack Obama's watch, he even deals with this here, the U.S. economy generated 8.6 million net new jobs, equal to 29.45, or about 3 carrier deals every day,
Yes.
including Sundays, for going on 8 consecutive years. And who can forget all of those patriotic Republicans congratulating Obama for that? So there you have it. I think, concentrating again on the policy rather than the outrage is the smarter way to go, even though it's a more frustrating one, because the outrage is what gets you mad.
Yes. And, the frustration, the outrage is well, now.
Why isn't everybody outraged the same way we are? Well, there's for progressives and for liberals, there's a painful but very easy answer for that.
Oh.
Were you for Bernie or were you for Hillary? And if you were for the other one, how come you're not outraged like I am that the other one, so on and so forth? People have strong feelings about things, and they may not be your feelings. And so outrage alone doesn't necessarily unite people, because not everybody's outraged about the same thing.
True.
That's just how it works.
This is bad.
On the other hand, policy that clearly is better for everybody or worse for everybody is something you can actually unite around. You just have to find the emotional connection, which is where we started with talking about jobs and not the economy, in order to sell it. So that's my wrap-up. I'm trying to pull all these disparate things together and make it into a semi-common thread. But there you have it for today. That'll be it. I got to get out of here a little early. It's December in Connecticut. We had our first snow.
Oh.
We have about 2 inches, which is hardly nothing, but, it's enough to slide to work.
Okay. Well,
so we got to give ourselves a little bit more time than
right. You better do that. And, all right. Well, good luck. Drive carefully.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay.
As long as we have power. We lost power for 3 hours yesterday for some random reason that had nothing to do with the weather. That happens here in rural America, which I'm well familiar with. Oh, before we go, though, we do have to talk about this thing.
Yeah?
That ad.
Which?
You saw it.
Oh, yes.
There is an incredible, powerful, disturbing trigger warning ad that Sandy Hook Promise produced about high school and going to high school, and we will post that link in the roundup later today.
Yeah, okay.
I actually have a very short piece on it that I posted on Daily Kos where you can find that.
Why don't we put that in our
I'll
context for reading.
I'll put that up for you where you could find it.
Thank you.
But it's well worth watching. Just it's very difficult to watch. I felt like after I watched it, I wasn't expecting the ending, and I felt like I just got kicked in the stomach, and it was disturbing me the entire day. So I just warn you before you watch. But it's a really, really powerful ad devoted to watching for signs of things that you otherwise might not pick up.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to spoil the ad by telling you too much more, but it's very good.
I will say this: everybody I sent it to, even without too much commentary, the big thing I noticed when people were retweeting it, was the comments that went along with it. Everything from just basically "oh my God" to and watch all the way to the end. To must watch or you won't believe, it's almost like clickbait. You won't believe what happens, and you really won't.
You really won't.
And it's well worth watching. I didn't see anybody say meh to that. The point was brought home for everybody.
Nobody said meh, I don't get it.
Yeah, and there were a few people who had various difficulties in watching it or saying, well, maybe this ought not to be the focus for this reason or that. But nobody said, well, that didn't grab me.
Yeah.
So you'll see.
Oh, big deal. That was boring. Nobody said that.
Yeah. So there'll be, I think it would be better to maybe to link to your piece about it just so that there's some discussion, context, appropriate warnings where necessary, and then you can make your decision about going ahead.
Yep. Anyway, so I did that.
Very good.
I think for our listeners, I will tweet out that story with a KITM hashtag in a few moments.
Excellent.
So everybody can follow along if you want to. Or, as you go on to a different topic, if you want to take a moment a little bit later and take a look at it, you can.
Yeah, and if you're listening by podcast, you can just pause and go watch and come back, and nothing will have changed, but you will have changed, so why not? Maybe you'll appreciate the show differently from that point on.
Okay, take care. Some
Thank
housekeeping stuff. Again, I'm leaving a little early. I will not be on the show tomorrow, meetings, and I'll be back on Wednesday.
All right. we can live until then.
I think so.
Thanks very much.
Alrighty, take care. This is
Appreciate it,
Greg Borkman speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. David and I like to talk. We never see each other, but we like to talk.
Right.
And we try to do it as often as possible at 9 a.m. Take care, and we'll talk to you, and I'll see you on Wednesday. But David's got more to talk about now. Don't go away, and we'll tune in later and see actually what it was.
You will, anyway. Hopefully Money will join you.
He doesn't.
Right. I don't know. I couldn't tell you now.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. You do the same. We'll see you tomorrow. By the way, I probably could not tell you what was talked about even after I've done it. That's one of the reasons that I have enlisted the help of Scott Anderson to help write these summaries. You would not believe it. Maybe you would. I don't know. There's something weird about it. I don't know whether it's just me or whether it would strike everybody the same way. I can ask other podcasters. But I don't know. And hardly anybody does their podcasts this way. I think, generally speaking, people say, let me make some notes about what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll do the podcast. They may wing the actual commentary, but they probably approach things with a list of what to do. I should, and I don't. And I don't know. One show like that, there's got to be room for that, I guess, somewhere in the market, and we've found it. Don't try it yourself, because we already own this space. Get lost if you're thinking of winging a 2-hour news talk program, or else think about this. Call in as a guest to my show and relieve me of the difficulty of stumbling through this. But I couldn't tell you at the end of most days. It takes some concentration for me to sit down and concentrate and think, what did I do? And if I don't have a list of the articles I used, or immediately following the show, just some interesting background to how this thing gets produced. If I don't leave my tabs open to the stories that I talked about, and then you just ask me off the top of your head, what did you cover today? I can remember 2 or 3, maybe the last 2 things that I did, and then the rest of it I have no idea. And then people sometimes during the day will tweet and say, oh, that was a great thing. It was funny or interesting or a terrible thing that you said about X subject today or yesterday or Friday, God forbid. And I say, don't really even know what you're talking about. Certainly no idea what I said. What kind of story was it about again? Did I cover that? And I'm amazed to find out in looking back that I did. I'm not really sure what does that. And then in addition to that, of course, going back and doing your own show recap and doing it accurately when it meant listening back to your own show, listening to your own voice, talk about things that you already discussed today. That's boring. Then, of course, you realize it was so boring to me that I forgot I already talked about it. That makes it even more ridiculous. And anyway, this is a long way of saying how fabulous it is that Scott Anderson is doing this for me instead. And a good way of saying one day in the I hope not too distant future, when we have, for some reason, the world wakes up and there's just tremendous financial support for this show, I would be able to pay him like a lot of money. Not $1 million a year. Not going to make that work. But some fair wages for the amount of hours that get spent on it. Right now, I can only make a token payment before. Well, the way things work out, you never really know how much money is going to be around. So let it go in drips and drabs here. By the way, good opportunity also to remind people who are, in fact, already supporting the show, who are doing so via recurring donations in PayPal, that PayPal is still owned, at least in part, a large part, by Peter Thiel, who's, I guess, turned into a weirdo and Trump-supporting wacko. And so when we use PayPal for anything, not just for supporting the show, this is a terrible thing to realize, but basically he makes a profit off of every transaction that we do, and alternatives perhaps ought to be found. Now, for online shopping, you might be out of luck. PayPal might just be the last thing to come along. Maybe somebody else will start something else. But for monthly recurring support to the Kagro in the Morning show, as it happens, there's a fantastic alternative, Patreon. it doesn't cost you any more money to use Patreon than it does for you to use PayPal. I think in the end it ends up costing me more money in that a smaller part of your donation actually makes it to me because some of it goes to pay the Patreon people, and the portion is larger than that which goes to pay the PayPal people. But I guess we're going on the assumption that the Patreon people are nicer people than the PayPal people, at least when it comes to Peter Thiel, and I hope I'm never proven wrong about that. But anyway, the point is, if you are still using an automatic deduction, an automatic payment program run by PayPal, you can, without spending any more money, and the only risk being, yes, turning over personal and payment information to yet another online company that may one day be hacked, and you lose. There's a significant risk. There's no doubt about it. But once you're in the pool for PayPal, and frankly, you might as well just remove your information from their grasp if you can. I'm sure you can never erase you certainly can't do anything about their database, but why leave your current information in the hands of Peter Thiel, who knows what sort of wacko things he may decide he's going to get into later. I don't know. Hasn't got a good track record. No real reason to believe he would go completely nuts, but partially nuts, too late. Anyway, so transfer, if you would. Think about this. I've seen a few people do it. There's notices come up in my email, so I'm watching you people. I know who's doing what, and it's not your fault, and it's taken me months to switch things too. And one of these days, I keep saying to myself, I'm simply going to email people who I can see still have recurring payments via PayPal and ask them, would you think about, and this takes some guts on my part, would you think about canceling your recurring payments on PayPal and signing up for Patreon and doing the same payment? No more money, although if you like, you could double your payments or add $1 to it or what have you, and move it over to Patreon and thereby continue to support the show, but hopefully keep some pennies out of Peter Thiel's hands. It's the pennies add up. When you have enough people, he's not going to care. Peter Thiel isn't going. Don't worry about him getting mad and coming after you. He'll never notice. But in the meantime, we'll feel like we're doing something, and I don't know. Sometimes that's worth something. Anyway, so consider doing that. Many people have. Many more people need to, and I guess one day I may show up in your mailbox and pester you to do it. And if you don't want that to happen, go do it by yourself. By the way, what just out of curiosity, what would it take for there to be plenty of money to pay Scott and also for me to be able to say to my family, you have to leave me alone to do a show, even on a day when you guys are home from school. You do this largely, but there's tremendous pressure to not do that. So I can take everybody out to breakfast, particularly when the whole family is home for vacation of some kind, right? Or what would it take to have the kind of money either to convince them that was necessary? Because right now they say, well, why should we allow you to ignore us? I know you enjoy doing the show, but the show doesn't pay the mortgage. Oh, right. But I really do enjoy it, and so other people do too, and that's good. So what would it take to get to that level? Doesn't that mean that each one of you would have to send $100 every day to pay the mortgage? As it turns out, no. The show is still doing pretty well in terms of downloads. I mean, we had a huge spike during November, late October into November 8th, of course, for the election, where we were daily over 4,000 Libsyn downloads, and I don't even know how many other downloads elsewhere, whether through iTunes. We had a pretty good handle on, I don't know, probably about 500 a day on Stitcher. Don't know how many on iTunes. A few other platforms had, so it was about 5,000 people a day downloading, and about 400 plus at the peak listening live through the Netroots radio player. And then there were some other live players out there too that we couldn't get numbers on. It's a difficult thing. You'd think you'd be able to get those numbers, and you can. The technology exists to get those numbers. It's just that the platforms don't like giving their numbers up because numbers are money. for some people. Not for me. Anyway, the point is that even with about 4,000, even with about 3,000, if the numbers are lower after the election, and they are lower, but they're not down to 3,000, they're about 3,500 libsyn only downloads per day. And I just think about the number of times, for instance, that you have run into an online app where you said, this is stupid, it makes fart noises, but 99 cents. I have a reason to want to make a fart noise on my phone today. 99 cents, that's nothing. I'll throw 99 cents at it. Or if, for instance, you came to depend on this show for daily sanity, would you say 99 cents? Is that a good price for daily sanity? It is. And you probably, if you were in a live space, if I'm standing out on the sidewalk doing the show with an open guitar case on the ground, you'd probably, you wouldn't put 99 cents in there unless you had a pocket full of change, but you'd probably put $1 in there and say, this is good. And then you'd only be listening for 5 minutes. What about 2 hours? Well, okay. So here's the math, right? If 3,000 people were downloading the show every day and it was 99 cents a download, $1, think about that. It's $3,000 a day. Oh my God. I'm set. Right? I could have a real studio. I could have a producer. I don't know if do I want to have a real studio? I'd have to leave the house. But I rent a place very close, so my commute would be short. But we could have that. We could have Scott taken care of. There could be all kinds of post-production stuff. I could have time after at 11 o'clock. I could shut everything off and either do gun fail stuff or try and get Merrick Garland confirmed, various things like that. And I wouldn't have to do even the minimal amount of post-production work that I do now just to make the Scott Anderson thing happen. That would be fantastic, right? We could have best of shows for weekend or for vacation periods. If I had a studio, if we had the equipment, there could be guest hosts. If I'm out, instead of a rerun, you could hear somebody real talking about the news of the actual day. These sorts of things. Think about that. If you were pulling 99 cents for 3,000 downloads, and we do about 22 shows a month, right? So think about that. That's insane. I don't need that amount of money. That's the point. $3,000 a day times 22, that's $66,000 a month. How many months are we currently using in a year? Are we metric yet? 10 months a year? No. 12 months a year, 22 shows. I don't do that all, right? But think about how nuts that is. $792,000. I'd be done. My wife could retire. She would stop plotting my murder for the insurance money and finally say, I don't have to go out and earn all the money, and he stays home and does this show for no reason. That would be good for us. So let's say something more reasonable, 10 cents a show instead of $1, right? That would be a still probably way too much money for what I'm actually doing here, $79,000 a year. But I could certainly say, okay, Scott, instead of getting, $100 every once in a while for spending a couple hours 5 times a week putting together this thing that I can't stand doing, you could get an hourly rate that makes sense for you as a professional, because he is, after all, an audio editing professional. So, okay, I wish I could pay that prevailing rate. Well, I could at 10 cents. Somebody really needs to develop a decent micropayment system, because honestly, I don't know if 10 cents is enough of a barrier. I wonder. I mean, free is free. And I don't know how many times I've said, I really need XYZ app, and then I go and I find it, and they're like 99 cents. And I say, 99 cents? I'll figure out a way to do it without the app. Of course, that's because I don't have $792,000 a year coming in subscriptions. But if I did, and you had an app, you would be very happy, because I would give you 99 cents back. That's not a good deal. But the point is, just as we have to support actual journalists who write the stories that make this show possible, because if I didn't have their stories to read, we really would have nothing to do. Although I could do a fundraising pitch for an hour. How about that? If you don't want this to happen again, Patreon, calculate it out. How many cents would you be willing to pay per show? Because even 10 cents, By the way, just checking here. So 10 cents, 22 shows a month, $2.20 a month. Most people are saying, I think, closer to 20 cents to a quarter. Like, would you throw a quarter in a hat for today's show? Not today's show. Today's show, I would ask for my money back. But today's show, any other show, 25 cents, about 22 times a month, $5.5. That's a great number, 5.5. You can't do it on Patreon. That's why, well, that's one of the dumb things, I guess. But, all right, they make you round up. So someone will say $6. Make it $5. And plenty of people are doing $5, and that's, I think, the one that makes sense. $5 a month. I love this show. That's nothing. One coffee a month. One of the 8 to 9 days a month where there's no show, I won't have coffee, and that'll pay for the rest of the show. And $5, if the 3,000 people minimum who was downloading it daily were paying $5 a month, right? That's $15,000 each month, $180,000 a year. More than enough for the people who put time in on the show by far, plus equipment, because one day I guess this stuff will break down too. So there you have it. That's what I'm saying. I don't know what that means. That means send money, and that's the hardest thing in the world to say. So, okay, let's stop saying it and give you the news. Instead, other things happened besides my realization that we weren't getting anywhere with the fundraising. So what were those things? Well, like I mentioned, Standing Rock. 2, other big to-do yesterday. Unbelievable situation, thankfully unfolding without anybody actually getting hurt. But fake news invading the real world once again. The insane idiots behind what I'm calling America's madrasas. That is the loose online networks run by Al-Aqs Yones, otherwise sometimes transliterated into English as Alex Jones, and of course enjoyed, supported, and shared by Michael Flynn, or sometimes spelled Michael Flynn. Oh, by the way, National Security Advisor to the incoming president. They have been sharing the totally insane, as you know, because we've discussed it on the show, conspiracy theory about Comet Pizza, or Comet Ping Pong, as it is sometimes called, because I guess they have both pizza and ping pong, which is a strange combination, but not one that would lead me to believe that they were in fact an international undercover pedophilia ring. I would probably need to see something else by way of proof, but they felt fairly certain that it would help them defeat Hillary Clinton in the election, and so they freely shared that view. And guess what? Some idiot who believes that crap showed up and said, I am going to check this out and find out what the hell's going on here, and I'm going to bring my AR-15 to do it. He showed up at Comet Pizza with a gun, and apparently it got fired inside the restaurant at some point. I have no idea whether this is purposeful firing, and nobody has said it was gun fail. Rather amazing. I mean, obviously somebody who's a little off, let's say Edgar Madison Welch, and we know he's off because he puts 2 D's in Madison. And who does that? Really? 28-year-old man from North Carolina, and why would anybody in North Carolina be radicalized? Showed up with an AR-15, as he told police, to self-investigate an election-related conspiracy theory involving Hillary Clinton that spread online during her presidential campaign, and even actually predated this latest campaign. By the way, I'll read it to you from the highly recommended diary written by Igualdad over at Daily Kos. Trump supporter fired assault rifle in D.C. pizzeria over conspiracy theory spread by General Flynn. This really does have to be stated again and again. The National Security Advisor spread this information. The fear is he also believes it. But even if he doesn't, the fact that he's willing to pretend he does and spread it the way he does, as he prepares to take the keys of the national security state, which is no small thing to worry about in this country. This guy shows up with a gun. I'm saying last night, tongue in cheek, you can only keep it in cheek for so long. Okay, Michael Flynn also believes what this nutball believes, but hey, at least Flynn doesn't have access to the kinds of weaponry that, oh my God, of course he does. It's a bazillion times worse when the National Security Advisor purports to believe this. But let me read you Igualdad's summary of what's going on here. He begins with an embedded tweet from Adam Serwer, who, I love it, still goes by Mazel Tov Cocktail. Although that joke is less funny after they won. But okay. A man was just arrested with a gun at Comet Pizzeria, the target of anti-Clinton / pro-Trump conspiracy theory, according to the Washington Post. And then that article cited by Igualdad under the headline, North Carolina man told police he went to D.C. pizzeria with assault rifle to self-investigate election-related conspiracy theory. So he's arrested yesterday after he walked into the place carrying an assault rifle and fired one or more shots. So that's, by the way, some investigation. You walk in the door and go bam, bam, probably into the ceiling. Like everybody, I want your attention, or this is a robbery, that kind of thing. And by the way, I'm thinking about going to a bank today and doing the same thing and saying, don't worry, just investigating your bank. Put all the money in the bag. I just want to see if it's real money. I'm going to take it home. I'm taking it home to my workshop. The light doesn't light up on one side, the Grinch says. I'm self-investigating. All right. So he's crazy. Big deal. So there you go. He walks in and fires into that's a great investigative technique, by the way. So I'll say this. I tend to doubt the investigation story. I think the story was that he came thinking that the story was true and that he might have to shoot his way into the back room and rescue abducted children. And how he got talked out of it and not killed, by the way, I am not sure. But let's see if the story reveals anything. So the man told police he'd come to self-investigate an election-related conspiracy theory. You know which one. The incident caused panic. Duh. Of course it did. With several businesses going into lockdown as police swarmed the neighborhood after receiving the call shortly before 3 p.m., which of course means there were families with kids in there to eat pizza and play ping pong, not to sell them into sex slavery. But that didn't occur to this guy. And by the way, this is no different, except I guess we weren't expecting this, than people who hear online that Planned Parenthood does a bazillion abortions a day, and if you walk into one of those with a gun, you'll stop a Holocaust. Somebody does that every once in a while. And then they don't do it for a while, and we pretend like it's over, except if you work at Planned Parenthood or are daily involved with their operations, which I guess at this point we all should be and need to be. They never forget that that's the case. Anyway, police said that 28-year-old Edgar Madison Welch, and somebody sent me an interesting, I guess they Googled his name and see if he was ever been in the news before, and he has been, but nothing spectacular. This involved an accident, a car on pedestrian accident where I guess Edgar Madison Welch ran over a 13-year-old kid, but I guess handled it the way a regular citizen is supposed to. You stop and say, oh my God, what can I do to help? And wait there for the police. He did that. So somewhere in between then and now, he lost it in terms of being in touch with reality. But I don't know if he knows that. Anyway, he walked in the front door of Comet Ping Pong and pointed a firearm in the direction of a restaurant employee. The employee was able to flee and notify police. Police said Welch proceeded to discharge the rifle inside the restaurant. So at least he made some calculation, whether it was a panic calculation or not a calculation, or just a panic or a reflex. He couldn't pull the trigger when he had it pointed at the person, so that's something. Anyway, here next is embedded a tweet from Abby D. Phillip, reporter, and you probably recognize her name. And along with it, I guess, is a clip from, I think, the Washington Post piece with some highlighted text. The restaurant's owner and employees were threatened on social media in the days before the election. after fake news stories circulated claiming that then Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton and her campaign chief were running a child sex ring from the restaurant's back rooms. Insane, of course, but that's what people were saying. More insane, the National Security Advisor believed it. Don't tell. No, tell everybody you know, of course. And then the highlighted portion, of course, reads, even Michael Flynn, or Mikhail Falin, as I like to read it, a retired general who President-elect Trump has tapped to advise him on national security, and let's just say it, is the National Security Advisor. The Condoleezza Rice of the Trump administration is Michael Flynn. That's the job. And no, the Senate doesn't have the opportunity to reject him for that job. That person serves at the pleasure of the president. Period. He's in. Panic. You're allowed. So, Michael Flynn, a retired general who, well, you know who he is, apparently also shared these stories. None of them were true, but the fake stories and threats persisted, some even aimed at the employees' children. True also. The restaurant's owner was forced to contact the FBI, local police, Facebook, and other social media platforms in an effort to remove the articles. P.S. Who the hell are you going to turn to under the Trump administration? Can you call the cops? The FBI? Can you call the FBI now even? You can call them, but do they give a damn? Who knows? Call the police. Call the FBI. Alert the president. Alert the National Security Advisor. What do you do if the president is hearing from a National Security Advisor who says, this stuff is true? We may be better off letting individual people do vigilante justice there with the AR-15s. If you don't believe me that it's true and don't just send the National Guard to do this, then why not let people freelance, you know? And maybe we won't even prosecute them. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Anyway, that's the story. Abby Phillips' comment on that clip, of course. Also spreading the fake story about Comet Ping Pong Pizza, Trump's new national security advisor, retired General Mikhail Falin. Brandon Wall also tweeted on the subject. D.C. police man arrested at Comet Ping Pong pointed firearm at an employee who then fled, fired the gun inside the restaurant. The shooter, here's the news, I guess in part of an update. Here's the clip about the car accident. The shooter recently ran over a 13-year-old in North Carolina who eyewitnesses say could have been avoided. I don't know how much you want to read into that. Accidents happen. He didn't flee the scene. We'll say that. And yeah, this is the piece that I saw. So reported out of Salisbury, North Carolina. And it was from, I don't know when, October perhaps sometime, something like that. Yeah. So what happened to the kid? He was critically injured, but I believe has survived the crash. And the guy he was driving the speed limit too. So I don't really know why you have the accident, but who knows why anything happens. Anyway, one more update from Igualdad. It says the shooter, Edgar Welch, has not been charged with anything for running over the young African-American teen just weeks ago. That's not terribly surprising either. So I don't know if I want to make too much of that. I think we got him pretty good on the going into Comet Pizza and firing an AR-15 in there. Probably can set aside the vehicular accident for some time, but always worth having context. Yes? Okay. Very good. Anyway, I found that rather startling, and it came up in my thinking. There was some more discussion online yesterday of the possibility mentioned and outlined on this show a ways back. I don't know, a couple weeks ago, right? And sometime in mid-November, discussing using the temporary January 3rd, starting at noon on January 3rd, Democratic majority that would be present in the Senate immediately following the noon on January 3rd termination of the terms of the Senate's Class 3 membership, and immediately preceding the swearing in of the new senators-elect from Class 3. by Vice President and President of the Senate, Joe Biden. You remember this story if you're new to the show, for whatever reason. The quick and dirty was, when the terms end, there will be 66 sitting senators at noon, and presumably noon and 1 second. 66 sitting members of the Senate, 34 of whom are Democrats, 2 of whom are independents who tend to caucus with and vote with the Democrats, and 30 Republicans. If you had unified caucuses and the independents stuck by the Democrats for something like what we're talking about, we'd be talking about a 36-30 Senate. You, generally speaking, never do anything with the Senate at that point other than have some brief welcoming remarks from the majority and minority leader, and then the swearings in of the new senators elect, and then by 12, well, they do the swearing in like two, I think, senators at a time, and so they spend some time. So by 1 o'clock, you're back to 100 senators again. But somewhere in between that time, there's less. Nothing ever happens, so it never matters at that point. But you want to get bare-knuckled about things. The Senate runs essentially, you've heard before that the Senate runs on unanimous consent. It doesn't run on unanimous consent like that anymore, hardly ever. Everything's contentious, but when we talk about how the Senate really runs, it really runs based on what the presiding officer does. And remember that Joe Biden is still president of the Senate until January 20th, again at noon, so he can show up and claim the gavel on January 3rd, and instead of immediately proceeding to the swearings in of the senators-elect of Class 3, you can instead turn to the senators then sitting on the floor and see if anybody seeks recognition. Sometimes they want to make welcoming remarks. Usually the tradition is you recognize the majority leader first. Most people think of Mitch McConnell as the majority leader, but as you look out over the Senate on January 3rd at 12:01, you will see 34 Democrats and 30 Republicans, the actual majority at that moment being in the hands of Democrats. The actual highest-ranking floor leader of the Democrats at that point will not be Chuck Schumer. He'll be one of the members of Class 3, a senator-elect at that point, waiting to be sworn into the Senate, fully expecting to be sworn into the Senate, unless we do this. But Dick Durbin would be the highest-ranking floor leader among the Democrats at that time. And what if he rises and seeks recognition? And, at that point, Joe Biden would be well within his rights to say the chair recognizes the majority leader. And then Mitch McConnell would start talking, and Dick Durbin would say, "Excuse me, I'm actually the majority leader here." And if he knew what was up, Mitch McConnell would start screaming immediately. And if he didn't know, or he was resigned to the fact that it was workable and could be done, he sits quietly while Dick Durbin then says, "So we're going to take up the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. I have in my pocket here," or I understand in Vice President Biden's pocket is a new nomination from the president of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, and the Senate takes notice of its receipt, and I move that we immediately take it up. Has anybody ever done it? I don't think so. Certainly not for a Supreme Court nomination. But so what? Nobody ever did anything until they did it, and who cares? It's a slightly different situation from the nuclear option in that part of the argument about the nuclear option was that people had done it before, even if people pretended they didn't either believe that it had happened or that the precedent had been erased or that it was somehow different, but it had been done before, and it's been done before and since. So there, whereas this hasn't, but it's based on largely the same principle. There is, by the way, one other hang-up, which I think we do run into with it. I've kind of gamed it out in my head, but there was a great discussion online, on Twitter, of course, about it yesterday, and I will try and include a note or a link to that discussion requires my remembering and making a note to myself to do that. Among a couple of Senate reporters, that is to say journalists whose beat is the Senate and they have some understanding of what the rules are all about. Then, they were kind of evaluating its viability, and there was outrage about it, and probably the correct assessment, which we've never really hidden from, is that they just are very, very unlikely to do something like this because it's really, really nuclear and really, really amazingly out of the box for people like this. But, as I pointed out, I did my time in the political wilderness being told sometimes by Senate reporters that, this whole idea of simple majority rules change that's not actually how it works, and you don't understand how things actually work. And that went on for several years until it finally was the way things worked. And now everybody knows it. Now reporters don't say that anymore, and they say, this other thing you're saying just isn't the way things work. I know. It's not. And the biggest difference, really, honestly, the biggest bottom line difference is we just do not have the time to lay the groundwork that was necessary to get them to the place that they had to be in to exercise the nuclear option. Though I will say this, in the end, they ended up being bolder about its use than I thought they would, or even advocated that they should be. So there is that. But the thing about the filibuster reform was you had the opportunity with an issue like that to say, well, let's try it, and if it fails, we'll come back later and try it again. And here we only have one shot at it. So the likelihood of getting something so complicated done in short order and done right in one shot, the first shot out of the box, that alone has pretty slim odds attached to it, without even getting into the question of, do they have the guts to do this? They don't until they do. Anyway, I will dig that link up, and I just thought it was kind of promising. And also on Friday, Susan and Marcos were after me to write the damn thing up and get it posted, and I am doing that. I've been working on it, and I've been tinkering with it all weekend, and it's a difficult piece to let go of because there's always something more to add to it, and I'm trying to smooth it out and not make it too detailed at the same time. Lots of detailed questions need to be answered about it, and of course I have this one hang-up about it that I can still see tripping over, though I have an approach to how to solve that, but it's difficult. But maybe I don't mind sharing the plans, because I do think that it's probably actually best to work it out, see if it's actually mechanically doable, and if you can convince Republicans that it's mechanically doable and can convince them that you have a unified enough Democratic caucus, to actually bite the bullet and do it. If they see that threat looming, but then have the offer of an out, that, in other words, that if you offered them to confirm Garland now under regular order and just pretend you were giving in for the good of the country and for, conciliatory, magnanimous purposes, to bring the country together, would you rather swallow that, or would you rather swallow getting nuked? You might be able to go ahead and get people to believe that, and to say, you know what, I'd rather just do the regular order thing and leave it at that. So, that would be a perfectly good outcome, I think. Anyway, I didn't mean to hang up too much on the details of it, but just to let you know, still thinking about it. Big discussion about it online. You might have some fun reading about it once we include it in the roundup. And be on the lookout for a Daily Kos write-up of the procedure that you can use and share with friends, or email to Senate offices when they say, what the hell are you talking about? All right? How's that for an update on that subject? Okay, speaking of stuff that isn't supposed to be done, the reason I followed up the Comet Pizza story with this story was I thought of them together a little bit last night, just in terms of think about how crazy it is that the National Security Advisor and all the resources that person is able to marshal or cause the president to marshal on his say-so. Think about how much power is being concentrated in the craziest and possibly most disastrous way imaginable. And how crazy things have to get for that to happen. To see that the National Security Advisor designate believes in this kind of insanity and that manifests itself in real and dangerous and possibly deadly ways in the real world, even though the whole thing is fake. And say to yourself, yeah, but you don't want to upset the apple cart with any weird parliamentary procedure, right? You know, I mean, that's not going to stop Michael Flynn from becoming National Security Advisor, so it's a little bit tenuous. But I mean, if you're seriously, I mean, how much hope do you have if you also give up control of the third branch of government? It may be that these guys really are in the business of, and to fully intend to ignore judicial orders about these things, but then at least you have a clear conflict and you say, man, the Supreme Court says that thing is illegal, and to the extent I believe in the court system or the constitutional system, I really do have to put my foot down about what the president is doing and Congress is allowing. But if they all go along with it, what are you going to do? I mean, you can still resist, of course, and insist that everybody else is pre-wrong, but it's not likely to find a lot of support elsewhere. So I think to give up a shot, any shot, really by any means necessary at that fifth seat at this point, it's pretty much, I would guess then it's a crapshoot. You're all done. You're rolling the dice and just saying, I really hope that the fact that the National Security Advisor is a total conspiracy theory nut doesn't result in a lot of us getting killed. I may be wrong, but hey, gee whiz, I really hope that isn't. All right. Well, what about things that are a little more closer to home in terms of saying, well, we need to counteract that with aggressive parliamentary maneuvering? Because I have something. Did you guess that I had something? It's from Forbes magazine, in fact, and written by Stan Collender, who is a well-known quantity in the congressional procedure and congressional budgeting procedure world. He's a budget expert. And guess what news he brings us? I can't tell you because, of course, Forbes is objecting to my ad blocking software, which I have in place because it prevents auto-playing video from popping up in our show. So I'll read you from the pocket view. You heard it here first is the headline. Trump may not propose a budget next year. Yes, he may forego the opportunity, or in fact, really the requirement. There's a legal requirement, yes, but again, it's like, who cares? Who's going to enforce this one on me? What's the remedy for the president not submitting a budget? Nothing. Well, you all just stand there and say, it's illegal. And he says, okay, I admit it, it's illegal. And now what? And the answer is nothing. We don't get to do anything. So he might just drop the budget entirely. That won't affect what Congress does. And it never does, even if you submit a budget. Honestly, the most reliable thing in Washington, maybe, is that the president will introduce a budget and members of both parties will essentially declare it. They love to use the term dead on arrival. The opposition will definitely use it. Sometimes his own party uses it. But the biggest use of the president's budget is as a bargaining chip and a rhetorical tool. You compare what it is you, as a member of Congress, want to do to the budget to what the president recommended be done with the budget. If you think the president is underspending on something that's a priority, you say, this wholly inadequate proposal from the president we think needs to be doubled, and the president will only spend on this, or as we know it's important. If you think the president is a wastrel and spendthrift, you say, we slashed the insane president's budget by half because spending $10 million on cancer is crazy. We think 10 cents should be spent on cancer, and it's not much more than that. The president's budget gets carved up and thrown away. If I thought that Trump and his team really knew how things worked and they were saying, you know what, we're not going to submit a budget because who cares? They always just throw the president's budget out anyway. I'll let you know what I want in a budget as you write one. I would respect it, but he's not a savvy enough operator to believe that that's true. But hey, you never know. You could get surprised. So here's what's going on. According to Stan Collender, the Trump administration is seriously thinking about not submitting a budget to Congress next year. I guess the only other really weird thing about that is we need to run government like a business. We need a businessman in the White House to bring business sense and to bring our budget under control here in Washington, D.C. And so we elect that guy, even though it's like that guy has never budgeted anything reasonable in his life, and he cheats on his budget all the time, and he still keeps going into bankruptcy with his companies. Why would you want him to do your budget? But okay, businessman, yada yada, CEO. Budget is surely one of the things that's directly translatable from business experience into government experience. Yes, but I don't have that, and also it's hard, so I'm not going to do it. Although the Congressional Budget Act, Collender reminds us, requires the president to submit the fiscal 2018 budget to Congress between January 2nd and February 6th, Trump could easily say, as he no doubt will, that it was really the responsibility of the outgoing Obama administration to comply with the law before the new president was sworn in on January 20th. It is kind of short notice for the new president, who only becomes president on January 20th, to comply with a February 6th deadline on submitting a federal budget. But that's what transition teams are for. That's what the transition time is for. That's what having a budget plan when you campaign is for. I know it's garbage and all the campaign stuff gets thrown out, but if you're a serious person, you've had thoughts about the budget, you've hired people to have thoughts for you on the budget, one of those two things has happened, and you put together a budget, and you might say, okay, so don't dot all the I's. It's all going to get torn apart, but next year we'll do a better job. But he just says, screw it. Now, I'm not certain, and it's not a done deal that he's not gonna. He certainly could present a garbage budget, and it would be no worse than anybody else's first budget, but there you go. That would be amazing for him to say, yeah, well, it's also short notice, but you've been president for a long time. You need to submit a budget. You got free time. You're not got anything to worry about except what house you're going to move into afterwards, which is a pretty big concern. Do a budget for me. I don't know. Anyway, while the new president not sending a budget to Congress might not be illegal, it would clearly be unprecedented. Every incoming president, since the Congressional Budget Act went into effect in the mid-1970s, has submitted a budget. By the way, in case you were thinking about reconciliation, and that word, to the term of art, reconciliation, come back into vogue. Everybody remembers it, and Republicans are threatening to use reconciliation to repeal Obamacare, parts of Obamacare that seem to be more firmly rooted, more difficult to tear out and repeal by simple legislation. They're going to use reconciliation, sometimes because it allows those sorts of things to be addressed in ways that typical legislation doesn't, and for sometimes because it's filibuster proof, and people like threatening that. Anyway, the Congressional Budget Act is what created reconciliation, and it also, of course, created the requirement for a president to submit a budget. But then it might be interesting to argue at some point, it wouldn't get you anywhere in a majority rules Congress, or even the supposedly differently run Senate, which I sometimes doubt is very much differently run than the House. But okay. It would make for an interesting discussion anyway to say, well, we're going to do reconciliation and we get to run roughshod over you and no filibuster is even possible, so don't think about it. Says who? No filibuster is possible. Says the Congressional Budget Act. It says right here that you're not allowed to. Yeah, well, the Congressional Budget Act also says the president has to submit a budget, and he didn't do that, so why do we have to obey that? We have to obey that rule, and you don't? Nuh-uh. Except they have the majority, and they say, yeah, you do have to, and we just end up having to. So, but don't pull any parliamentary shenanigans, you guys, about Supreme Court justices. So continuing with Collander's piece, in many years, those budgets or amendments to the outgoing president's final budget were submitted months after the first Monday in February deadline, and were truncated versions of the usual multi-volume presentation. But a fiscal plan with the new president's priorities always has been, consistently released for over 4 decades. Longtime federal budget watchers will find Trump's unwillingness to submit a budget strange, because up to now, every new administration typically has been eager to submit one in its first year. By the way, it'll be a hell of a pairing. I also am the first one not to release his taxes since forever. And P.S., I'm not going to show you how I plan my finances, and I'm not going to show you how I plan to plan the finances of the country either. Just, it's going to be great. It's going to be fabulous. We're going to do a terrific thing. So, why have presidents always been eager to submit a first budget? It's the biggest opportunity that will exist to present the president's plan for all to see. Well, screw that, right? And for the White House to dominate the news for a week or more as the details are released, discussed, analyzed, and promoted at congressional hearings and other forums. That's got to sound good, right? So, why might the Trump administration want to punt on this major opportunity by not submitting a budget? First, it would allow Trump to avoid the complaints that always come from those budget proposals and those things that would harm him, I'm sorry, how did I lose the track of this sentence? It would allow Trump to avoid the complaints that always come from those the budget proposals would harm, get it? There we are, by denying them a platform to criticize the White House. In other words, if you're waiting for the president's budget to say, yes, I'm going to cut Medicare, to attack him on cutting Medicare, he just won't tell you he's going to do that, and then you'll sit there twiddling your thumbs until finally Paul Ryan says in May, guess what, we're going to cut Medicare, and then you'll attack Paul Ryan. So what does the president care about that? Nothing. Good. Sit on your hands until Ryan takes the blame for it. So continuing with the article, no proposals on paper would mean nothing to disparage. Second, it would allow the White House to avoid having to say how much its taxing and spending proposals will increase the federal deficit and national debt. Remember that, given that many estimates put the likely annual deficit from the Trump campaign plans at $1 trillion or more, and that the total increase in the national debt before the 2020 election could easily equal the borrowing during the first 4 years of the Obama administration, which they hated. Remember all of that? Well, considering all of that, the likelihood that this is a major consideration should not be downplayed. In other words, if you don't submit a budget, there won't be a chart telling everybody, yeah, we know we're going to destroy the deficit and the debt, and we're going to blow it up. And now what are you going to do? Just think of the value, Colander writes, of not having to publish a table that for the first time shows those very high numbers and not having to answer to the House Freedom Caucus about them. Third, it would also eliminate the need for the administration to publish a table with the very optimistic GDP growth promised during the campaign, the high interest rates many economists think are coming, and Trump's unrealistic assumptions on jobs and unemployment. We don't have to own them. Hey, that does sound good. Fourth, it would eliminate the need for the House and Senate to hold hearings on the Trump budget. That would expedite Congress's consideration of its own 2018 budget resolution and the reconciliation process that is widely expected to be used to accelerate the passage of many of Trump's and the House and Senate's Republican priorities. Fifth, although there have been a few rumors about possible directors of the Office of Management and Budget, and this is probably really what's behind it, almost a month after Election Day, no one has yet been named. That almost certainly will delay the development of the Trump 2018 budget until almost the summer. And the Republican congressional leadership might not want to wait that long to begin its work on the all-important 2018 budget resolution and reconciliation. In other words, he hasn't hired anyone to write a budget. And so it's not going to get done in time because he didn't plan anything because he didn't think he was going to win and he didn't have any real plan. Finally, because the White House and Congress will be preoccupied until around the end of March with a budget resolution, reconciliation bill, and appropriations for 2017, and a new debt ceiling increase. Remember, that's got to happen too. Unless, of course, Trump just says, screw it, let's default and nuke everybody. Trump may not have time for the 2018 budget that would have to be developed at that same time. Given that schedule, plus the fact that it will take some time to get the Trump cabinet and sub-cabinet confirmed, the White House may think that not submitting a 2018 budget and just working with Congress will be its best chance to be successful. Trump not submitting a 2018 budget is just something I was told by sources in the Republican congressional leadership. The Trump Transition Office did not return a call asking for comment. So take with grain o' salt. Collender says nobody in the incoming Trump administration or in the Transition Office said they were going to do this. It's just Republicans in leadership and their aides say, yeah, probably. I don't really see them getting around to doing it. So it might be prepared that could happen. And I think that's a pretty good guess. But in conclusion, he says, it makes sense that a never-before-tried procedure like this would be considered. After all, Trump so far has been more than willing to bastardize the budget process in other ways, like, and I guess he's expressed an interest in this, reconciliation twice in the same year to get what he wants adopted and avoid criticism. Why not this scheme as well? Now, those of you who have followed the old reconciliation stories and discussions probably say, if you remember, wait a minute, reconciliation twice in the same year? I thought part of the deal with reconciliation was that it was a one-shot thing. You got one shot at reconciliation in a year, and, that's one time to try and shoehorn something in without possibility of a filibuster, and that's why it's not offered that often. And that's something of certainly a misunderstanding to say that, that there was some conscious, I think, decision to say, well, the filibuster is so weird and tricky that maybe we should write a rule that says, well, okay, once a year you get to do something that's not subject to a filibuster. That was not the point of that. It wasn't about, having a once a year wish list avoidance of the filibuster. It was to enable expedited procedure on a very, very narrow range of non-policy issues, purely fiscal issues, purely financial issues, and really, I guess, technically speaking, I don't even know that it was limited to the once a year, but certainly limited. You can put instructions for several different committees to do reconciliation work in a budget resolution. Typically, all of the reconciliation work ends up getting taken care of at the same time of year, but it's been the practice that you end up with an omnibus reconciliation bill that wraps up all the reconciliation, the answers to all the reconciliation instructions issued in the budget, as considered and passed by, reported out by all of the committees directed to do this work, and then you roll it up into one bill. But there's no reason that you can't, I don't think, do a separate reconciliation bill under reconciliation procedures, by which I mean exempt from the filibuster, for each of the committees. It's just a giant pain in the neck, and there's no real reason to do things that way. So in that sense, I don't think there's anything wrong were illegal about doing reconciliation, more than one reconciliation bill in a single year. But this is, I think, talking about something else, perhaps, and maybe bringing a second round of reconciliation bills back later on to try to bat cleanup and still claim that the reconciliation rules that protect it from the filibuster are applicable simply because the bill bears the title reconciliation. I don't really know exactly what they're talking about. I doubt very much that Trump knows exactly what he's talking about with that either. But again, if he were really proposing trying something that was that big a departure from accepted procedure but could technically be done if you have the votes, another reason not to shy away from doing the same with respect to maybe your last chance to save the republic, to try to be as hyperbolic about it as possible by grabbing that fifth seat that frankly everybody knows should have gone to Obama in the first place, and it should have happened a year ago. Well, not quite a year ago, but nearly a year ago. And that's why, I kept saying, well, maybe you stick with Merrick Garland on these things because you end up with the expected result. There's less uproar. But everybody knew that seat was Obama's to fill. And I think he'd be justified in filling it in any number of ways. But, they're going to upset the procedural apple cart when it suits them. You can either say tut tut and stand by and say we don't engage in such things when you do, and miss out on the opportunity to have a fifth seat. Could there be nuclear responses to that? Could Trump come back and try to pack the court and make it even bigger? Sure, he could. Could he try to pack the court anyway? Sure, he could. He might. But if he does, at a point where you decided to forego the opportunity not to pack the court, but to take back the nomination that was supposed to be yours in the first place, only to find that there's now 12 members of the Supreme Court and more than half of them are Republicans and about a quarter of them are Trump appointees himself, will you at that point say, geez whiz, I wish I had tried that aggressive parliamentary maneuver? By the way, another thing I point to as a reason to think about trying something like that. Down in North Carolina, I've mentioned it a couple of times, that the governor, current governor there, the Republican governor McCrory, continues to threaten to be ever more aggressive tactics, I guess. He continue to threaten ever more aggressive tactics to try to grab back the governorship, despite the fact that he's 10,000 votes behind by every count his Republican challenger. He's been displaced. He's lost the election. And he's considering his options for using brute force in the state legislature to simply tear the governorship out of Democratic hands, the hands of the Democratic nominee who won it. And I'm blanking, thinking about so many other things about who that actually is. But in case you had any doubt about how aggressive they're getting, they're essentially saying, I will simply ask the majority sitting in the North Carolina state legislature to just declare the seat vacant and then say, when we got a vacancy for this reason, and we're unable to come to a clear decision about who won the election, well, the prerogative to settle the question is taken out of the hands of the Secretary of State and the elections folks, and instead very clearly put in our hands, and so we'll take it. And guess what? Because we're a majority Republican body, it just so happens that we decided that the Republicans should win. I think that's absolutely in the offing. It's certainly what they're threatening. And, there's no real reason why you couldn't say, look, I know this is happening in North Carolina, but North Carolina is a pretty important place. It's one of only 50 of our states, as a matter of fact. And if you're going to do this with the chief executive job in one of those states, well, hell, you should be on notice that we might respond on the federal level. And, you might think that's disproportionate, but basically, screw you. This is what is available to us, and we're doing it. And there was a Slate article sent along with it, but long story short from the Slate tweet on that one, McCrory calls special session of the legislature, setting up the possibility of a court-packing power grab, in addition to declaring himself the governor, in case anybody, I guess, wants to challenge that in the state's court systems. Well, what if he also packed the court with his own people and, gee whiz, not only won in the legislature, but could win as against any legal appeal as to the legality of having done that? I didn't get a chance to read through the actual piece here. I don't know. It's not even quite all that long, but I've read one of the earlier pieces by the same author, Mark Joseph Stern. I guess we might as well update it. Let's do a roundup of crazy governors in the several states, by which I mean, since it's 1047, 2 states. North Carolina, and Bill's home state, in where he's, of course, the throne of the of his empire in Portland, Maine. That means Paul LePage, mini Trump. Remember, we keep saying that he's a preview of what's to come with Trump. Wait till you see. All right, but first, North Carolina. North Carolina Republican Governor Pat McCrory. And don't you try to pat my Crory. I'll kick you in the, you know what. All right. Pat McCrory is not a big fan of democracy. Who can blame him? Apparently, when democracy happens, he loses. First, McCrory signed and championed HB 2, the vicious anti-LGBTQ law designed to overturn local non-discrimination ordinances, and that's I think the key connection to the democracy thing. We've talked about this as like a nationwide trend of any time Republicans keep saying small federal government, devolve everything to the state and local level, unless the state and local level decides they want something that we don't like as conservatives, and then you strip the ability to do that. If it's marijuana, you use the federal law to say, screw you states saying you're okay with it. Although, again, Democrats have been players in that, and we got to decide what we're going to do about that. I got an idea. You can call me. Or if it's Republican-run states, but local, sometimes blue islands, urban islands, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes suburban ones, and they say, we want to do something differently than, say, the crazies who are beholden to the NRA want us to do about backyard gun ranges in our area. To us, in this subdivision filled area, we think shooting in your backyard is a terrible idea. But the state legislature says, no, we forbid you to devolve things to your local level. We were for that until we found out what you were doing, and now we're against it. Same thing here with HB2. If a locality said, you know what, I'm not afraid of people being able to use the bathroom where there's not going to be any trouble or controversy, and people will just go to the bathroom privately, and nothing outwardly upsetting like somebody who looks like the other gender walking into your bathroom will happen. Instead, everybody will look generally like they're the same gender, and then after they go into the stall, it's nobody's business but their own, and then they bother nobody. But no, they're not going to allow that anymore. You remember the law. On Election Day, because of this, McCrory lost to Democratic Attorney General Roy Cooper, there we go, who opposed HB2, but he refused to concede, flinging baseless accusations of voter fraud seemingly designed to let the Republican-dominated legislature ignore the results and install McCrory as governor. Now, McCrory awaits the results of a partial recount that cannot possibly close his 10,000-vote deficit. Wink, wink, unless it does. He has decided to call a special legislative session in December. The stated purpose? to address hurricane relief funds. That he can get away with. But many Democrats fear a darker motive to pack the state Supreme Court with new Republican justices before the GOP loses hold of the executive branch. But we're not going to let that happen. Or are we going to let that happen and then also let it happen on the federal level? Currently, 7 justices sit on the North Carolina Supreme Court. Before the election, the court split 4-3 with Republicans in the majority. On Election Day, however, voters ousted a conservative justice, replacing him with a Democrat and tipping the court to the left. It's an elected Supreme Court, you see. Republicans already tried to prevent the progressive candidate from running, passing legislation that was ultimately ruled unconstitutional. Now rumors are flying around the Capitol that McCrory and Republican legislators will push through a bill expanding the court from 7 to 9 justices, allowing McCrory to appoint 2 new ones, no votes, and maintaining Republican dominance over the judiciary. That is to say, your elected state Supreme Court will now have 2 more seats on it. That one guy gets to pick them. If Republicans were to pass a court-packing bill, it would look a lot like what's happening now. The last time the North Carolina Republicans held a special legislative session, it was to pass HB 2 before most voters even knew what was happening. That's how they tend to use special legislative sessions, apparently. Republicans have mastered the art of the rushed special session designed to pass unpopular legislation without voter input. The upcoming December session marks a prime opportunity for Republicans to pull this trick with a court-packing bill. Of course, McCrory asserts that the session's purpose is to help with the Hurricane Matthew, of course. But we've seen this chicanery before. In 2013, North Carolina Republicans took up a straightforward motorcycle safety bill and turned that into an anti-abortion bill that placed ridiculously onerous requirements on abortion clinics. The Republican-controlled state Senate sat on the bill until the last full day of the legislative session, then swiftly passed it with minimal debate. McCrory promptly signed the bill into law, breaking a campaign promise not to further restrict abortion access. Democrats, caught off guard, never fully mobilized. Could Republicans pull a similar trick with court packing, waiting until the last minute, then having last minute of the upcoming special session, then cramming it through? Of course. Will they? Well, it depends on what they think they can get away with. Republicans' grasp on power is clearly slipping. Cooper will soon take control of the executive branch regardless of McCrory's efforts. And a federal court has ordered the legislature to redraw their maps without racial gerrymandering and hold new elections next year. Why wouldn't Republicans use this opportunity to sustain their supremacy over the judiciary? However, illegitimately, they have everything to gain and nothing left to lose. But don't let us monkey with the judge situation on the federal level, right? So, I promised some LePage news. Let's quickly grab this one. It came to my attention, of course, via Bill right there in Portland. LePage cites possibility of fraud but not evidence. Get that? Remember that construction of headline? In casting doubt on election results. Long story short here, in case we don't get to the whole thing. Okay, it's fashionable now, right? Everybody knows they can get away with it. So Paul LePage, who's a mini-Trump, comes out and says, yeah, millions and millions of illegals voted all over the place, mostly California, so he won Trump won the popular vote, right? We've all heard that tune before. That surely is what he's doing, yes? Just jumping on that bandwagon? Answer, no, he's dumber and crazier than that. He's talking about Maine. It's true that he's talking about it. Noel Gallagher writes this for the Portland Press-Herald. Governor Paul LePage questioned the integrity of the November elections Friday, citing the possibility of voter fraud without providing any evidence of any problems. I'm glad they say that. With Maine's balloting. Did anybody think that was happening? I want to get on the act, but I want it to be about Maine. Why? The Secretary of State, he says, cannot guarantee with 100% certainty, the 1% doctrine applying here, that no non-citizens voted in this election. LePage said in a written statement issued Friday afternoon. He cannot guarantee that no college students voted both in Maine and their home state. He cannot guarantee someone did not vote in both the town they previously lived in and the town they now reside in. Of course, you can't prove that happened. It's just that, yeah, we're going to reverse the burden of proof. Because why not? Because YOLO, LOL, nothing matters. Maine's Secretary of State responded with his own statement saying voters can be assured the integrity of the elections is not in question and there is no evidence of fraud or malfeasance. LePage also said that electronic voting machines and paper ballots can be manipulated or miscounted. If even one vote was counted improperly or was cast by a non-citizen, then we must determine how to fix it and make sure it does not happen again, he said. Question: what is LePage's position on recounting Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, etc.? That's an interesting standard. I'd be somewhat curious in how you could defend that standard and still oppose recounts in those other states. It's just, I don't know, cuz, shut up, dummy. Probably the answer. Until we can ensure the integrity of the voting process in Maine, by which he means 100%, apparently, I cannot attest to the accuracy of the results of this election, nor can anyone else. Yes, they can. And they will. They did, as a matter of fact. Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap responded with a written statement directly contradicting the governor and challenged LePage to report any evidence he might have to law enforcement authorities. The integrity of Maine's elections is not in question. If Governor LePage or any other party has evidence of attempts at voter fraud or other malfeasance related to the election, we encourage them to come forward with that information so those instances can be investigated. Citizens of Maine can be fully confident that their votes are counted accurately and the results reflect the will of the voters. The dueling statements came 2 days after LePage sent out a letter to legislators that included a standard message telling them they should show up in Augusta on December 7th to start conducting the people's business. In his letter, the Republican governor added that he had strong concerns about the November 8th results. Hey, me too. But he says in his letter, I'm issuing this summons and signing this election certificate despite the fact that I maintain strong concerns regarding the integrity of Maine's ballot and the accuracy of Maine's election results, and I cannot attest to the accuracy of the tabulation certified by the Secretary of State, LePage wrote, and I don't know whether he has to or not. But maybe. Wouldn't that be interesting if he held Maine's electoral vote input hostage to his idiot conspiracy theory? That would be probably the least dangerous of the day's conspiracy theories. But the guy's a maniac, literally, and there's just no reason for it. Nobody had called it into question. And, of course, the standard of if you counted one vote wrong, everything goes to hell is just amazing. And I don't know. I mean, now that it's in fashion to allow people to make these accusations, and I know the press does the right thing here and says he has no evidence, but it's almost like I have to say at this point you have to go the extra mile and say he has no evidence because no exact evidence exists. It didn't happen. He's crazy, and you should impeach him because he's so crazy. Let's just please do it already. So I encourage you to try to consider that up there in Maine. Well done, everyone. We're going to wrap things up and hand things over to the guys on the after show to cover all the stories that I have refused to date to actually pick up on. For instance, Eric Trump claims the Wisconsin recount has killed at least 5,000 children. I just read that straight out from, I have no idea. Justice says that, and I don't even know anymore. I'm just going to have to tell you that's what it says. And if you want to know what the hell that means, stay tuned. That's the biggest teaser I can give you. There's more, of course, but that's amazing. Mike Pence sees a real opportunity to gut Medicare for poor people. And when it comes to reporting on nasty demagogues, the New York Times public editor can't even figure out what to do about Steve Bannon.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thank you for listening, and especially during my extended indulgence in the fundraising operations. There's more to come, of course, on the after show, and they could use your support too, and you can add your support, believe it or not, at netrootsradio.com. I encourage you to go ahead and do that. I think that's a fair trade for what they're going to get to in the after show's last half. So do they.